Good morning. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Kwagala, your host. On today's edition of Focus on Parliament, we reflect on three major developments. The first is the controversial decision of the High Court, which upheld the legality of the service award by the parliamentary commissioners. Even as the High Court ruled that the service award was illegal, it simultaneously termed it as improper, a decision that has further complicated the progress of the censure motion against the targeted parliamentary commissioners. Number two, we discussed the relevance of the proposed parliamentary regional sittings, even as they continue to face widespread opposition from the wider public. Number three, we discussed the decision of Parliament to reject the proposed Alcohol Control Bill of 2023, citing very serious implications on the Consolidated Fund. Viewers, once again, you are most welcome to this program. I now have the pleasure and the privilege to introduce to you my esteemed guests to help us discuss today's topics. Let me start with Mr. Timothy Chemonges, the Associate Director for the Parliament Watch and the Center for Policy. Timothy, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, Isaac. Good morning to our viewers. Glad to be here. Looking forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, Timothy. And Charity Ahimbisibwe, the Executive Director for the Institute of Electoral Laws and Governance. Charity, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
A very good morning, Isaac, and a good morning to our viewers. Most certainly, always happy to be here, and I think happier that I'm here with Chemonges Timothy from Parliament. I don't know if he has the money from Parliament or he just sees it at a distance. I'm happy to be here with Timothy Chemonges, who once in a while looks at Parliament as an institution.
Timothy is going to tell us. For that matter, let me start with him. Timothy, in this week, the landmark decision by the High Court, quite controversial. We have failed to form quite the exact understanding of the judge when he says that in as much as his finding is that the award, the service award, by the three parliamentary commissioners is legal, but at the same time improper. What is your reaction to that?
So thank you so much, Isaac. Looking at the developments, specifically the ruling of court, I think it settles a number of things and a number of questions that we've been having in the recent past, as far as the legalities of the processes in Parliament, to the question of morality that has been also raised in regards to the resources that the leaders utilize. I'm really particularly concerned by the questions, because if corruption is the question at hand, there are mechanisms in which, as we stand today, corruption has been included in the processes, the legalities, and it's being hidden in that direction. And so being able to successfully have a matter settled on corruption is an issue that is not yet very clear. And this is an example of those that taking the legal approach entirely in terms of addressing the question of corruption may not be a successful venture for us. Two, in light of Parliament's position on matters corruption still remains very glaring. And while court may have settled the question of how these resources were utilized and the manner in how they were approved, the question of Parliament's position in light of use of resources, in light of the use of its structures and institutions within, and the departments within the institution to legalize or to allow for resources to be used in a manner that may not reflect the country's vision, but also the aspiration of the people of the country is an item that is still very clear. And so I think that the decision by the court settles the legal question, but now opens up a Pandora of the morality question in this country, of how those charged with the responsibility or given the mandate to exercise it on behalf of the people should be able to utilize these resources. Two, the petitioner in this matter primarily based on how the Commission of Parliament approved the 1.7 billion,
yes,
and how that was distributed, and also raises the question of how the accounting officer in Parliament, who is the clerk to Parliament, should have conducted himself, and proposes quite a number of disciplinary mechanisms to be undertaken by the appointing authorities. That's the PSST. And so I think also that's another very interesting area, to the extent that there's the responsibility being put on this individual who should have guided otherwise. Court is very clear in terms of the questions of the service award and all those nomenclatures being used to spend resources. And so that's another area. But more importantly, Isaac, is to say that the conversation around corruption may not be settled at a go. Two, while the legal processes may be an easy fit to address specific challenges that we are facing today as a country, there's a bigger question on morality that we must be able to look at it. That while the Commission clearly, and it rightly did so to approve the resources that it approved, is it correct? Should Parliament be able to sit and identify resources for its own use, for the members themselves? The question of morality comes out very clearly. And so I think there's a bigger question in terms of how institutions in this country should be able to approve the resources, the use, but also in terms of whether this reflects clearly in terms of the aspiration of the people. Because we think that Parliament or the commissioners themselves, for example, in this case, should the resources that were approved, I think, were shouldn't have been approved in the first place, but they were approved, and court has agreed with that. And so the other very interesting area for me was the court settling the discussion whether the resources that were approved were actually in the budget. It actually explains that while there's a bigger number of MPs who actually made a very passionate submissions that there was never these resources passed, it explains the attention of our legislators to matters budget, to matters their responsibilities and mandate. Because ideally, it also explains how sometimes the budget process can be fishy, and how the people that actually are charged with this mandate sometimes don't pay as much attention as they should be, which also explains to laxity in terms of them executing their mandate. And so that's another area that I thought was very interesting. But while court has settled the question of legality, we still have the bigger question of the leaders that we have, the institutions that are meant to ensure that resources are utilized well, there is value for money, and that all these resources serve the intended purpose, and not. And while Ugandans are facing quite a number of challenges, and then you see the other side, the resources are not being used rightly, it's a discussion that's still hanging. Yeah.
Charity, this is a decision that has confounded the Ugandan public for the reason that it seems to point to a contradiction. The court finding that indeed the service award was legal in a sense that it adhered to the strict procedure requirements of having it passed by the Parliament, but at the same time holding that it was improper for political leaders to go ahead and grant themselves this sort of benefit at the expense of the citizens. Your reactions about that?
So my position about the service award will not change much from what Timothy has said. For me, I believe it was okay, in terms of what the court has said, court says it is legal. But for me, I believe it is immoral, it is wrong, it is corrupt, it is theft. Even as much as I believe in the law and have studied the law. From the position of the judge, and of course the judge himself has been put in the spotlight as a person who could have probably interpreted it wrongly. We have what we call interpretation of the judges in jurisprudence. That judgment is a basis of what the judge has understood the law to say. Okay? That we are finally bound by what the judge's opinion is.
But you don't agree with it in this.
Even if you agree
case.
or you don't agree, you become bound by that opinion. That's what jurisprudence teaches you. And so the school of thought of the opinion of judges being the law, because now the opinion of this judge has turned out to be the law.
Yes.
It's what is binding us right now. That the opinion of one judge has now turned out to be the one thing that we are following as the law. But let us interpret it broadly, in its broad sense. You see, if you read constitutional history, constitutional law, you'll be told that the Constitution is not read in portions, neither is the law read in portions. The whole law is read as a continuous amalgamation of the other. Like the Leadership Act is emanating from somewhere in the Constitution. That's why we have Hans Kelsen with his grand norm, that we have a big law called the Constitution. And from the Constitution comes all these small laws that reinforce what is in the grand law. So the grand law, yes, has gaps in it. And the gaps have been identified in those articles that you see now. A parliament can decide on its own emoluments. And that was done by the Constituent Assembly. It's not a thing of the judge. It's not the Judge Singiza who did it. No, it was the Constituent Assembly. And he will even clearly tell you that for him now, he's just following the things as they are written down in the books. And so you can, at one point, take it off him, but at the other point also realize that this gap must be dealt with. But when you look at the reasoning of the Constituent Assembly, what was the reasoning? The reasoning was they wanted Parliament to have a certain level of independence, if you're talking about the balance of powers. So here we find ourselves in a very difficult position when we want court to play politics. So expert Matovu's ghost is back.
We have revived it.
We have revived, we brought back
this decision.
Yes, the ghost is always flying about chasing us. Because in expert Matovu, a legal question had to be, a political question had to be resolved legally. And this is exactly what it is now. That a political question is being asked to be resolved legally. And so the public is now disappointed that the court is saying what it is saying. This is exactly what happened in Matovu. So in 1966, this was already happening and it has come back. How many years? So this ghost called the expert Matovu is really a powerful ghost, and it never goes away from our laws. It never goes away from our interpretations. Yeah. But let me bring this home for a person who has not gone to a legal class. You don't care. So what about the legalities? They have stolen your money. You feel service award. You feel cheated. This is it, Isaac. Article 87, and I wanted to read it in its verbatim.
Please.
It says, because I was looking for it here, 87 tells us that there shall be, that is clerk to parliament. Let's go to 85. A member of parliament shall be paid such emoluments and gratuity and shall be provided with such facilities as may be determined by parliament. So parliament has all the power to determine your emoluments and gratuity. They are free, eh? They have a free range. Even me, if I have to cut meat, you've seen Tom and Jerry. Who cuts the bigger meat? Always Tom will cut a big one, then tell Jerry, take the small one, and Jerry comes back and says, no, now I'm taking the bigger one. So they have a full basket from which they are choosing what they want. And that is the leeway one. 85 too A member of parliament shall not hold any office of profit or emolument likely to compromise his or her office. Now here in this instance, we don't have that scenario because we don't have anybody who was holding an office with an emolument. But here comes the ticker boom. The fact that they can determine anything for themselves. They went as commissioners and they determined. And if you look at it in the strict sense of the law, even the Leadership Act, it is being interpreted against this constitutional clause that allows them to allocate this money to themselves and get it debated in parliament and get approval from the whole parliament, which were all followed. So in terms of procedure, the judge is saying the procedure is
correct.
good. So I want to take it off the judge at that point. So if the judge is saying the procedure is correct, he asks himself as he sits in his closure, okay, if the procedure is correct, how else do I pin them? Because it is a political question. There's politics. Courts also play politics. Courts also play politics. So he says, okay, the only win-win I can do for the people of Uganda is ask the institution of the Clerk of Parliament to be held squarely responsible because he is the accounting officer for this so-called parliament. When you're an accounting officer, you should know what is going to happen, advise people, tell them when what they are doing is wrong. Do we have a document from our good lawyer, because he's a lawyer, the Clerk of Parliament, that advised against the service award? Is that document there? Do we have a letter, a minority report, where he said, okay, yes, I have instructions from the commissioners, from Parliament, that they have agreed this and this, but me, as an accounting official, this is not a proper procedure. This is what should be done. Do we have such a document?
Does he have the power to overrule the...
He doesn't have the power, but I'm saying...
Or the commission, for that matter.
He doesn't have the power. But if he had it in writing, a dissent position, why do we have minority reports in Parliament? We have minority reports such that one day when we go back to review and we are saying, these people passed this law. Before now, there is a time when the ayes said no, and they said, the ayes have it. We shall go back onto the Hansard. And we shall always remember that there was a speaker who voted and gave her vote on behalf of the group that was losing and said, no, it is the ayes that have won. That's why we have minority reports. That's why we have writings. We get writings to put in position an opinion that will help us understand how to resolve the issues around us. So it is illegal. No, it's not illegal that they got the money according to the judge and according to the way he interpreted the law. The law is as such as he interpreted it. But the law in the strict sense, and I agree with Timothy, cannot resolve the moral question, and it cannot resolve the question of corruption. Neither can it resolve the political question of why the commissioners decided at this 11th parliament to have a service award. We've never had any other parliament that has had an award. Why now? What is so special with these commissioners that came in the 11th parliament? These are the broader questions that probably court should have helped us think through and begin to have answers to. And I also expected that, okay, the judge should have then, after realizing that the law is being abused a certain way, make recommendations for how this law can be amended to firm up, to take away the loose gaps where the corruption is being perpetuated from.
I can point out one, even before I go to Timothy, where he has proposed that the Attorney General originates a bill or an opinion.
Yes.
And then have the President approve of a comprehensive framework to rationalize salaries and emoluments for all public servants, including the MPs.
And for me, I'm happy.
That's a key recommendation
from
that he
court,
has made,
from his ruling. And that is very good, because now that is the beauty of going to court. That is very, very good. Yes, I had forgotten that. That is beautiful. The reason why that I'm very happy with that, he does 2 recommendations, even the one on the clerk is a very good recommendation.
Do you agree with that one?
Yes, because as an institution, he's saying, you see, I have told you, he finds himself caught up by the law, and he has no leeway of pinning any one of these commissioners as the law is. So he looks at the institutions and thinks, what can I do to help the people? Because he realized people were going to be upset with the judgment. He knew it. But he didn't have very many choices.
So he's played politics.
I told you courts also play politics. They do. They have to. But when he gives the recommendations that he gives, those recommendations are the ground for us to improve systems and institutions to deal with issues such as the service award that we saw. So through and through, it was a wrong decision for those commissioners to have given themselves that money. As much as it looks like the legal process was followed, yes, the judges have said the legal process was followed, and with due respect, when you look at the laws, yes, the legal process was followed, but we now need mechanisms to handle corruption that goes through legal processes. Yes.
Timothy, granted the court could have played politics, but where does it now leave the effort of the censure motion, which is being championed by a section of legislators to see that there is both justice and accountability for the citizens regarding this improper? The court has also agreed that it is improper. But then doesn't the decision altogether scatter that effort? What is the fate of the censure motion now?
So looking at the motion, so we've not had like a substantive motion presented to us, but it's just a process that...
yes.
So it seems to be primarily premised on the decision of the commission to, pass those resources. And to that end, it only means that the court has settled that, meaning that the motion by Sechikubo finds a setback. Now, there's a broader picture of the question of corruption within Parliament, which goes beyond just the Commission. There are definite concerns, because you see, again, from the mover, beyond Puga, which was just one of the issues that was being raised by the movers, there were other issues that the Parliament exhibition, together with other issues that were raised during that time, in light of abuse of office, the attitude and the characters of the presiding officer, the leadership of Parliament, and all the other issues around corruption within Parliament were matters that were actually raised, including the issues that are actually currently before court of cooperatives, where Honorable Mawanda and his colleagues, are being accused. And so, to that end, to the extent that the motion was premised on the issues around the commission, it finds a setback, partly because of the constitution provision again, where Parliament is not allowed to debate or engage in a matter that has already been settled
by the court.
Or taking a move in
that is contrary
to frustrate or defeat the judgment of the court.
So to that end, the motion is actually gets a bit of a setback. Two, I choose to believe that the intention of the intended movers of this motion was not just a debate in the floor of Parliament. There was also a political direction on this whole conversation, which I think it's a success. So while the matter may actually, I think, may never find itself on the floor of Parliament as it is now, because again, the court has given a lot of energy to the commissioners and all the other group of who opposed to this move.
Yes.
It has given them energy and space, to give a bit of a rebuttal. And so, even to the extent that this matter touched on the leadership of Parliament, it only means that they will pull the plug, the political plug, to not allow this matter find itself on the plug. Because the process usually is that once the member of Parliament or the proposed mover of a motion has attained the standard that is set. They present it to the clerk of parliament, who has up to 48 hours to
transmit it
transmit
to
to
the
the
speaker.
speaker. And there's the letter that Sechikubo presented. There was definitely proof that this matter was taken to the speaker, who again, the speaker has a lot of discretion in light of determining how to proceed with that. She could write back to the intended movers with a couple of reasons, and including the decision of court. And so I don't see this motion finding itself on the floor of parliament, not anytime soon. Two, I think to the extent there are many wins that the motion or the intended motion has actually achieved. Part of that has been to put the spotlight to the institution of parliament, to the commissioners, to the leadership of parliament, as far as abuse of office is concerned, the use of the abuse of resources and that kind of thing. But also, more importantly, it has greatly impacted on the credibility of the institution of parliament in terms of its capacity to stand firm on matters corruption. The personality, the character of the leadership of parliament has also been put on spotlight. And so I think that while there are efforts, and definitely there's going to be in the coming days, Sechikobos and all the other movers of the motion will definitely put in place efforts to ensure that they have this motion find itself on the floor of parliament. But from where I stand, looking at all the political connotations, but also the question of the legalities, I don't see this bill finding itself unless they choose to go back to the drawing board, where they have the motion get premised on a totally different, because again, to the extent that's going to premise itself on the decision of the commission, it will be having an issue with the constitution. And so I think that beyond the conversation, beyond court's position, there are many wins that have been realized in light of having the country have this discussion. The credibility of the 11th Parliament has already been put on spotlight in light of its ability and capacity to address this question. But also, more importantly, is looking at the IPI report, for example, it highlights that corruption remains to be a big issue in the country. And so actually one of the top challenges that the country is facing, beyond the question of governance. And so Parliament, being the people's institution and represents the views, the aspiration of the people of Uganda, should be at the forefront, of fighting, but also of addressing the questions of corruption. To that end, I think the 11th Parliament has failed to do that. And it is continuing, to just affirm that. Whether there is likely to be any move in the coming days as far as the motion is concerned, to have it on the floor of Parliament, I don't think so. Yeah.
Charity, still on Parliament, let us interrogate now the proposal by Parliament to conduct regional sittings. This coming, of course, on the heels of the hot questions regarding the failure of Parliament to account for the financial resources of the country, hard-earned taxpayers' money. Now, we understand that the estimated cost for each of those sessions is 5 billion. And they are going to be conducted across the 4 major regions of the country. But this proposal has been met with a lot of stiff resistance from the public and even the regional leaders of the smaller devolved local government units, including the LC5s and the other local chairpersons. Is this the magic bullet that could address the issues of the day for the citizens? The so-called regional sittings?
Thank you, Isaac. I think in my whole life as an adult, I have never seen such a hopeless decision taken by an institution of a government. And it has taken me aback. I have been thinking that the level of depression we have in Uganda does not warrant any more depression coming from our institutions. But this is what we call extreme abuse of power. It is extreme, everything is gross
About it?
about the sittings. The proposal to have sittings in regions is gross, it is extreme, it is horrendous. I'm even looking for the correct English expressions.
Charity, one could argue that it doesn't matter where Parliament sits, so long as it transacts and conducts business on behalf of the Ugandan citizen, and then resolves the challenges that they are facing.
So Isaac, whatever the argument is, do we see ourselves duplicating roles that are already there? We have members of Parliament going to the constituencies to pick views of the citizens on issues that are being discussed in Parliament. How many times have citizens disagreed with Parliament on issues and Parliament has paid attention to those issues? Even just now on the issue of the commissioners and the service award, did we agree with Parliament? Did we agree with what Parliament has been doing? Did we express our views as citizens of this country against it? When the citizens, when the young people said we are protesting against Parliament as a move to show that they have gone beyond overboard as a corrupt entity, and we're putting them in the spotlight, what happened? All the police vehicles, the biggest armories, the things were on the streets. And the young people were told, you cannot protest. So now what should a citizen do? Shut up, sit in a pot, accept to be abused. Every horrible thing should happen to you just because we must have regional sittings. That because Parliament can sit anywhere. No. Then we no longer need a Parliament. Indeed, like the President has said before, that I can scrape that Parliament can be useless, anything. It means I'm also saying that maybe we don't need this third arm of government. Maybe it's about time Uganda argued that we only need two arms of government. We need the judiciary and we need the executive. And we see how to strengthen the judiciary and forget about this Parliament, bury it, bury anything called Parliament and anything called leadership in this country. Because you can't call yourself a leader when you can't even represent the basic views of your people. Now, so when they go to the regions, Isaac, tell me what is unique that is going to come from the regions which has not been said on the floor of Parliament. What is different with going to Gulu, to Masaka? They're like a civil society organization. For us, we go there to raise awareness. As civil society organizations, we write our proposals and we say, look, we are going to go to Luka to raise awareness on a certain issue, maybe on issue on a girl child and whatever. So now Parliament has also become a civil society organization which is going to raise awareness. It's going to raise awareness on the issues that are in Parliament. And it's going to raise awareness over a small population. Because when they go to Gulu, are they going to meet everybody in Gulu? Is everybody in Gulu going to be allowed to sit in this Parliament? Is it in a school playground? Okay, look at the money. And Ugandans have made very succinct arguments, which I agree with, that 10 seed schools, government has been saying they're looking for money for seed schools. 10 seed schools would cost 20 billion. Why don't you pick that money and put it there? Why? Why are you wasting this money on MPs who are already overfed? You have an overfed child who is saying, I am too full and is puking, but you're still pumping food inside that mouth. Why? And yet there are these ones who are starving. Why not give them some of that money? So the 10 seed schools, the interns, the citizens have raised the issue of medical interns only need 18 billion. You're going to spend 20 billion. You'll even save 2 billion, which you can take back to the consolidated fund. And I saw the Deputy Speaker of Parliament saying, so you MPs who are saying we should not have regional sittings are also selfish. I could not believe the Honorable Taib. I just could not believe he was making this statement. For the first time, it's the time I look at Taibwa and I say, I hoped better from you. See how you follow through entirely. I just couldn't believe. And he says, what the MP should have suggested, other than have regional sittings, let's give this money to Chites. The MP should have said, let's cut down on all the allowances of the MPs and instead give it to the people in Chites, rather than the regional sittings. The argument is, it is useless for Parliament to say they are going in the regions to hold regional sittings because there is nothing new they are going to get from the regions, which they have not done on the floor of parliament. Let them first resolve the many, many issues that we have on the floor and within parliament before exporting them to the regions.
Perhaps, Charity, the rationale and the expectation is that Parliament will now have the opportunity to have some sort of pinpointed focus and approach on those regional concerns.
So why do we have regional governments? Why do we have local governments? Why? Why do we have decentralization as a system? Why is it that through decentralization we have processes that come from the the decentralized government to the central government to handle? So are they trying to say that parliament is more important than all these other governments that exist? And I am in agreement with LCs who know their duties. I'm in agreement with communities that know that, because we have speakers for each district. We have an LC5 chairperson with a speaker and his whole house of legislators who are picking views of the citizens from the constituencies, from the communities. So what is Parliament coming to do? Why don't they just ask those different speakers in the different regions to bring the views they have collected and they are reviewed in Parliament? What is special? Isaac, what is special? Convince me that what is it that is unique they are going to pick there? There's no valid view, there is no valid argument that Parliament is making. This is the most abusiveness that we have received from leaders. The level of abuse is maximum. You know, when a child has been defiled and then they come and defile you again. This is what is happening with this Parliament.
Timothy, could this approach turn out to resolve the challenges of the ordinary person now that it seems to focus on a smaller, unit of government? If the approach is to say let's go to Gulu, can we just focus on the issues of the region, the northern region, then we go to western, we adopt the same approach? What is the exact rationale?
So I agree with Charity that we still have a lot of work to be done before having conversations, of having regional parliaments. There are key questions as far as Parliament's mandate and how they have done that sitting in Kampala. We have issues that have been raised from the different regions. Some have been addressed, but most of them haven't been addressed. And looking at the current state at where we are discussing the question of limited resources, the question of resources, but also more importantly, looking at the structures that Parliament operates in, where you have committees. So you have committees, you have individuals, members of Parliament from the different regions. Actually, for your information, committees in Parliament does a lot of work. They perform almost 70% of the work. And so we have that platform, which they have actually been doing, and we could continue still utilizing it to allow the committees to go to the field, do the investigations, or go and look into the specific issues. And most of those things have been brought to Parliament. Have they been acted on? I don't think so. We still have an issue in terms of whether the current structure or the approach that Parliament is taking on the regional parliaments, whether it's going to contribute or make any significant change. I don't think there's any significant change that approach is going to address. I think there is need for us to reorganize. There is need for us to rethink on the role of Parliament, whether it has been able to execute them in the best way possible, but also to the aspirations of the people, of having the interests, people's desires, people's aspirations resolved and clearly put. Because again, Parliament holds a very special place within our democratic dispensation, and both actual and reality, it exercises and enjoys a lot of power. It is unfortunate that increasingly, and where we've reached now at the 11th Parliament, they seem to have ceded most of their powers, most of their mandates to the executive. And so puts them in a very peculiar position where they cannot fully execute their mandate. Talk about the question of budget. We've just experienced recently while Parliament was considering the budget. Whereas Parliament enjoys that autonomy within the, within the legal framework in terms of determining most of the things. You've seen what played recently when we were considering the budget for this financial year. The interference, but also, having the executive have their way, as opposed to, what the legislature thought. Looking at the question of oversight in terms of the use of resources, Parliament is a victim itself, and therefore even the desire and the thought that they can be able to outrightly hold the executive accountable to ensure that it executes what it's supposed to do becomes a bit of a challenge. And so that exposes Parliament, both in terms of having their work done, but also more importantly, they end up burdening the institution, where you have members of Parliament ending up doing what ideally the executive should be doing, partly because of the failure to actually charge those who are responsible for doing that, do it. And so I think that the current framework may not be able to realize. I think it's a public stand. There's a PR approach that is being done. But I agree in principle that once we've been able to address issues around that Parliament should ideally do, because it doesn't mean that there's any magic bullet that's going to happen when they're in Parara or they're in Gulu. I don't see any magic. These are the same people, the same approach, the same attitude, and what is in question is the resources that are being used. Could we use it better? I think so. There are quite a number of other areas that we could utilize these resources. The leader of opposition has raised the issues around the challenges that they foresee in light of the regional parliaments. But again, I personally disagree with the approach that they took. I think that them having a very firm position in light of the regional parliaments is good, but I think I would appreciate that they go and utilize the platform to champion their cause, irrespective of whichever decision they take. But the idea is they should utilize the platform to continue championing their cause and amplifying what they think is wrong.
Thank you, Timothy. Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. When we return, we continue the discourse on the topic of the day. See you back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. You're watching the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we discussed the decision of Parliament to reject the Alcohol Control Bill of 2023, citing serious implications on the consolidated fund. Charity, before we address the component of the Alcohol Control Bill, just briefly, what is your view on the decision of the leader of opposition to mobilize his troops not to participate in the proposed regional parliamentary sittings in Gulu?
So for me, my view is that Joel is right. because once they go into Gulu, they are going to be told, you are opposed to the idea of us taking regional sittings, but you want the money, the allowance, which is coming with going to the regions. Actually, most of those MPs are quiet because they know they are going to benefit financially from going into the regions. I am so happy that the elections are only 1 year away, 2025. I wish there was a way in which Ugandans would get holy anger and just overturn everybody in parliament, nobody returns. We get a totally new parliament with none of them having survived.
Across the broad political spectrum.
Like the attrition rate be 100%. If that happened for me, I would celebrate. I would dance from here up to the end. Unfortunately, I know what usually happens in elections: money, beatings, intimidation, fear. I wish there was a way in which Ugandans would maneuver and this time their vote is counted and we get rid of these people. I agree with the opposition that instead of being misinterpreted for why you opposed and yet you will go and get the allowance, you'd rather stay away. There are many ways in which they can engage the constituency. They can decide to go to the districts. We have 146 districts. Visit the councils in those districts. Look at the bylaws which have been developed for the various districts. Look at the gaps within the law for the districts. Look at the issues that are emanating from the districts and come up with what we call a matrix and a compendium of arguments. Now this is the opposition. They can use the budget of the leader of opposition, because the leader of opposition is the creation of the constitution and he is funded by the state to run that office. So they can use the funds of the leader of opposition, go into the districts and show them an alternative of how a regional parliament would have looked like, other than go sit there. This is what would have worked. So not join them, but come with a different approach, use it and show it to the present crop of thieves that it can be done with less funds.
Timothy, another significant decision by Parliament to reject the proposed alcohol control question, whereas there is a huge section of, including the wider public, by the way, that believe such industry should be regulated for the good, the greater good of the public. But then, according to the Attorney General and the section of other MPs, the reason that this could have very serious implications on the ability of the economy to be self-sustaining and meet the larger responsibilities. So, walk us through the motivation for Parliament to reject that bill.
Yeah, so it's not the first time we find ourselves here in light of this specific bill, but also there are three things probably just want to highlight as we look at this. The first is around the conversations around the economic, the economic arguments that have been forwarded, especially by the private sector, and then the question of the public health. The other is around the politics of the day and the question of the mover, who was Sarah Opendi. Sarah Opendi has been at the forefront, of championing this motion, and she was the mover of the alcohol bill. And so, while it may not entirely, directly have been looked at during the decision, there is a political undertone, that has gone on, that especially by the structures within Parliament, that it can't be you trying to bring a law here and you are going to shine, and you are on the same direction trying to, to shine a spotlight on the question of corruption and casting, casting bad light to specific individuals and that kind of thing. The other has been the role of regulation, which ideally should be the role of government, to ensure that it regulates, and that should be the primary role of government, to ensure that it provides an enabling environment through regulation, through the support that it has to the private sector and all the other stakeholders. And so, first, I think that there were a lot of behind-the-scenes discussions, especially by by those involved in the alcohol sector. Looking at the revenue that it raises. Two, the questions, the ability for them to use the resources they have, to push this cause of being able to put aside any efforts, to regulate this sector. When the bill
by lobbying,
lobbying is part of the policy making processes, and it should be.
It's a big issue.
It's a big issue, and so depending on where your interest, it's part of the process. Lobbying is part of the process.
Legitimately.
Absolutely, because again, it's about interests. It's about interest, and to the extent you're able to use the available advantages you have to have a law, to have a policy in place, or even to frustrate it. That is one of the mechanisms, and we've seen this here, and we continue to look at it. In terms of, and by the just the policy making process. Sometimes it could be a position that Parliament has taken. For example, the motion that is we've just been discussing here. Once a motion is passed, it is a position that Parliament has taken. It may not be binding, but it is a position that Parliament has taken in light of specific issue. And so, to the extent that Sechikubo successfully had his motion on corruption go through, and Parliament makes that position of that motion, and it has made it very clear that the Commission or the other corruption issues that were raised were irregularly conducted, and that's a position that so you will see that during all this process there's a lot of lobbying, there's a lot of under pressure that are going on, so it is part of the process. And so the private sector, those involved in that sector, have been heavily at this thing to ensure that it doesn't go against their will. But of course it's about money many times, but I think that we need to ensure that we regulate the alcohol sector to the extent that we still have a growing population, and most of the population, as it has been seen, are young people, and so we need, and that may be done without compromising, the business sector. There should be a mechanism of which we regulate the sector. Otherwise, if it remains unregulated, yes, it may contribute to the revenue, but also we are likely to lose the fabric of the society, the potential workforce of the country. So I think that looking at the efforts that we put in on the alcohol bill, and the arguments that were made before Parliament on both sides, including those by the Attorney General, it went to the political question of the day, and the political correctness in as far as the policy making process are concerned.
Charity, should the economic interest of the state and the business community be allowed to fly in the face of the greater good of the public with respect to the question of morality, but also, like Timothy correctly points out, to preserving the productivity of society and its growth and development?
You know why I smiled? It's because when the first time the alcohol control bill was brought, I trashed it 100%. I said, I don't take alcohol myself, but I trashed it on the grounds of the economy. It was more a question of, if you look at the environment, how do you protect the environment and yet promote development? Striking a balance between protection of environment and development is a very difficult thing. That's why we've had all this global warming, climate change, pressures. Now we have Chitezi. So to strike a balance between the economy and a healthy population that is not going to abuse alcohol and the use of alcohol, and productivity, because we have an aspect on our budget called human capital development. That aspect means that you're looking at your population and the productive population and how to use it to grow your economy. And like Timothy says, and I think this was the argument of the Honorable Sarah Opendi, that we need a population that is healthy and able to engage in production, not one that is dying off in road accidents due to abuse of alcohol. Alcohol is sold at any time of the day, and so sometimes you find people, young people, who should actually be sober in the morning when they are completely drunk and their bodies are shivering and they can't be productive. And in fact, they go back to the bar to try and see if they can pull themselves together. If you have gone and seen people who are struggling with the question of abuse of alcohol, you will understand where the alcohol control bill is coming from. And there are countries who have successfully struck that balance between the economy and a healthy population. One of them being Rwanda. The other is Kenya. Surprise for you.
Kenya?
Yes. That there are hours that are given for you to go and enjoy your alcohol. But there are also hours when you are not allowed to take that alcohol. Go into the villages and see how family heads are wasted, drinking while their wives are in the garden with children, trying to dig. That is a productive force. If the family heads were joining in the means of production, would we have a bigger population in the production arm not being affected by alcohol? If we count every year how many people we lose on the road as a result of having been drunk of or alcohol-related issues, they're the majority of the accidents that we have. So if we control the times when this alcohol is taken, but we strike a balance to know, that the businesses also still go ahead. You see, the Attorney General was saying it's going to affect the consolidated fund because it is one of the arms in which they collect money, which goes to the consolidated fund. And it is an agreement in Parliament that any bill which will take away from the consolidated fund should be laid aside. It's an agreement. But now, he also agreed and acknowledged on the question of a useful population. He also acknowledged that most of the suggestions within the bill can be co-opted by laws that are existing. He says maybe we do not need a completely new law. I think that at this point, at the point of lobbying and looking holistically at the whole thing, let us give a chance to all views. Let us look at the view of, can we co-opt some of these into the existing laws? How will it work? If it doesn't work, can we proceed? We do weighing the options. Can we proceed with the alcohol control bill and maybe take out the areas that the Attorney General and the rest of the people in the business within the alcohol sector are worried about? Because for them, they are worried about their sales going down and they're worried about their economic value. If you look at Nile breweries, why they are rejecting most of these things is because they know their sales will go down. But is there a way you can reassure these big alcohol companies, people who are bringing in wines? Supermarkets are importing huge wines. Then they even have these small Uganda Waraji, the small pints and whatever. You're exporting it, you're selling it. Is there a way of reassurance? There's a time when they came up with a bill in France and wine went bad. Like big containers and houses of wineries were stranded. Nobody was taking the wine. And France underwent a big loss on that. And yet it was one of their areas of production and exporting. And you see, as a growing country, you don't want to compromise on anything that brings in a little revenue for you. So if we look at galvanizing maybe our coffee, and then we look at this sector of alcohol and how to best utilize it without compromising the population, I think it would be a good thing. So the question now, Isaac, is going to be on striking a balance. I think the bill was good. I told you I started by trashing it. Then fast forward, I read the bill. And after reading the bill, I tried to listen more to the proponents. And when I listened more to the proponents, I realized that it's not that bad after seeing the countries that have just put timelines of where we say you can take your alcohol from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. It's not bad. Why should you be left to drink it as and when you want? Why do you want to drink it from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.? Why do you want to drink it the whole cycle of the day? Here, they're just rationing on particular hours. They're not saying that we are banning alcohol. You know, so for me, when I first saw alcohol control bill, I assumed alcohol has been banned completely. And I said, these ones must be crazy. But after going and realizing what it wasn't that they're banning it completely. They're just saying, let's have particular times when people are allowed to drink, and let's have particular ages that are encouraged not to start too early. There are people whose lives have completely been wasted, Isaac, with alcohol, and they wish otherwise. They wish they could get off that alcohol. They've gone into rehab. They can't get off rehab. You know, we have lost many prominent people, good brains, to alcohol. And I think that, therefore, legislating is not always the only solution. There are many multifaceted options, but can the legislation be in such a way that it strikes a balance? And I think we can achieve that.
Timothy, the personal politics of the main proponent of that bill, the move of the bill, the Honorable Sarah Opendi aside, why is it increasingly difficult for a private sponsored member bill to sail through the processes of Parliament and be approved as a statute?
Yeah, so originally it was, and it is the mandate of government to bring business on the floor of Parliament. That has been the primary, and it is the primary mandate of government, to ensure that it brings matters for consideration by institution. So the adoption of bringing on board the private members bill was an effort to cure an issue that seemed to continuously come up, that government was slow or even refused to put focus on specific issues as far as putting laws in place is concerned. And so the efforts of ensuring that matters that government sometimes may think it's not important, and yet they are important, members of Parliament should be allowed to bring those laws. And government has an option and discretion to co-opt that law as part of government law, or even partly support in any way. So that was the concept, to ensure that you allow members of Parliament, because either way, it is their mandate, they have a mandate of legislation. And so you can't cover them out completely. Other jurisdictions have actually gone ahead to allow committees in Parliament to have that discretion to bring a law. So in our setting, we largely have the executive, that's government, and then the private members. Other jurisdictions allow even committees within Parliament to think through a law or a bill and bring it, and they can process it. So fast forward, it became an issue around providing the certificate of financial implication, which again is a question of the law. That should a private member bring a law that charges funds on the consolidated fund or affects government's ability to put in money? So it became an issue, and many of the members, many of the private members faced a big challenge in light of bringing private bills on the floor of Parliament, because again, it's the Ministry of Finance that issues that certificate and does the assessment, and to the extent that it realizes that your proposed bill has a charge on the consolidated fund, then they will not give you a certificate. And so fast forward, the members of Parliament went and amended the Public Finance Act and provided a clause that once a private member has submitted an application or that proposal to the Ministry of Finance, within 60 days. If there is no response, it shall be deemed to have been granted. Because many of the members of parliament used to, present that application, and Ministry of Finance just decides to keep quiet. There is no response. And so it frustrated so many private members in considering that specific, or to be given the certificate. And so Parliament came up with that cure of saying that within 60 days, there's no response from Ministry of Finance, then it shall be deemed that the certificate has been issued. And so you're free to go ahead and introduce the bill. Because usually, at the point of first introduction, you present the bill, you present the certificate of financial implication as an assurance that you're not going to have a charge. And so progressively, we've seen very successful bills by private members, even others being, taken up by government. Others have been rejected. Others have not seen the light of the day. But the truth is that as a country, we have a bigger problem on the question of implementation of laws. It's not just for the private members. Both government laws that have been introduced by government, most of them actually, there's a very low rate in terms of having them implemented. So it's a big problem on both. But in terms of your question on why private members are having a big challenge in having their laws introduced or successfully find their way up, it's a question of, it's the politics of the day. Because again, the reason as to why a private member is introducing a bill is because it's those that are supposed to be introducing it either are not interested or they see it as not important at that specific point in time. And so you're bound to find yourself in a friction with those that are responsible for bringing that law. And so many times they will frustrate you. Or alternatively, if they feel that it's something that makes a bit of sense, they could co-opt it. So I think it's a question of the politics and the card that government has continued to pull of it affecting, having a charge on the consolidated fund. But I think it's an option because of the dynamics of the day. And Parliament, it's a good practice. But those are the dynamics that the private members bill face.
Charity, even as you consider your closing remarks, one last question. 2026 is fast approaching. Any hopes for major constitutional or electoral reforms in Parliament?
Major constitutional reforms in Parliament. The Honorable Norbert Mao said he has been pushing for constitutional reforms, electoral and constitutional reforms, because they are different. But he has not been successful because there was not a lot of government will. But I have been consistent in argument that we need to pass electoral reforms that are low-hanging fruits but will help our electoral process that is coming up in 2026. Because the whole idea of why judges sit down to review disputes that come from elections, for example, for members of parliament or even the presidential election, the whole idea is to improve on the process. So the question of electoral justice, every time we don't have these reforms and we go like we went in 2021 without any reforms, then there is no electoral justice. And we continue to run processes that are below the belt because you know that there is a problem within the process. It has been identified by the judges and it has been given a solution and a mechanism in which it can be solved, but you're not taking that solution. Until we take those pathways of ensuring that those reforms come to the floor of Parliament, I'll give you a very simple one, the one on civic education. Until we have a civic education policy that is signed off by the President and agreed to by the powers that be, that means the NRM and all the people in the ruling spaces, civic education cannot be continuous from one cycle to another. We shall continue to have disjointed civic education. But if we have continuous civic education every after an election, you will see improvement on the election spontaneously happening. Right now, there's confusion for many people. People don't understand the electoral college system, and they are young. They are the majority voters. We need to have the amendments that were suggested along the electoral college system to allow for more youth to participate, especially the marginalized. We also need to, and those are low-hanging fruits which I'm talking about, we also need to have proper considerations for what technology we are going to use in the 2026 election. If it is the APR data collection system, what is it? What is that APR? What does it involve? How are you going to collect the data? And what is it? How is it going to be analyzed? And how are you going to put out that data? So people need to know. That's another low-hanging fruit, because the judges said in 2016 that until we determine the use, management, and the type of technology that we're using in elections, there will always be questions of transparency on the process. So these are big things which the Electoral Commission is saying, no, you're out of time. We have a roadmap coming. I mean, we're already running with a roadmap. We have a voters register coming up in 2021. But you've also seen the Ministry of Internal Affairs saying your national ID is going to continue to be valid for 1 extra year. And yet you also know that Electoral Commission seldom picks its voters register from that national ID database. So knowing that that is what happens, who will be included, who won't be included? Those are also questions that are real for us to reflect on. So if government says that, okay, you can continue with your national ID, mine is expiring, by the way, Isaac. Supposing they say, Charity, you cannot vote because your ID is expired. Then I say, but the Minister of Internal Affairs has said it is still valid. Then Electoral Commission says, the standard is that it's supposed to be valid. As in, I mean, it is supposed to be showing us the years, the proper years. It's supposed to show us that it is expiring in, let's say, 2032. There are people who have IDs which are expiring in 2032. I didn't even know that. I was thinking all our IDs were expiring this year. I didn't know there are those who have 2032. There are those who even have 2030. So it's just a facet of about 15 to 18 million. So if Electoral Commission told me, you can't vote because that thing expired, and I go to court, and I present to court the statement which came from the Minister of Internal Affairs, and say, the Minister said these IDs will continue to be valid, and now the voters register was cut off, but for me I was denied because of this. What do you expect court now to argue for? So the question of reforms is a big question. We need to think through the processes of elections and know what affects electoral processes, what do we want improved, which one can we achieve, which one can't we achieve. I think the one which we can't achieve is changing the law to allow for, if there is an annulment of an election, to beyond 20 days. We can't achieve that because we have to conduct a whole referendum, which is equal to a whole election. 2, we also may not be able to achieve the reform to do with a parliamentary or a presidential election system, because some people are saying, no, we will do a parliamentary system. It can't happen right now. For that to happen also, you would need a whole referendum, and you'd need citizens to entirely agree whether we are moving from a presidential to a parliamentary. So we are going into 2026 under the parliamentary system, and the Electoral Commission has been clear on that. The other one we might not achieve is the question of bribery and the use of money, commercialization of politics, and the bill to do with commercialization of politics, because for that bill to go through, it goes through phases. You have to have discussions around it, go up country, talk about what are the issues that drive this commercialization, how can we best deal with it. And if the conversations start now, which is just 4 months to the voters register in January, you're going to have those conversations stretching up to 2026. So would that reform be sufficient for 2026 elections? It can't be. It has already been taken by events. But the question of technology, of allowing Ugandans access to information, using their phones, having the internet on, and being reassured that it won't be switched off, that can be attained. And maybe it should see the day of light on the floor of Parliament.
Thank you, Charity. Your closing remarks on the program.
So my closing remarks, one, I want to urge the Parliament, dump the idea of regional sittings. It does not add value to any Ugandan. And it only tarnishes the image of Parliament. I think that Parliament as an institution should consider that the reason it exists is because it is a full arm of government. An arm of government is one that understands that it has to serve the citizens of this country. So I urge the leadership of Parliament, and I urge all the members of Parliament to reconsider this position of taking the Parliament to the regions. And on the question of Sech Kubo's censure, I don't know whether it's useful anymore. Yes, he says his prayers are different from what court has ruled, but I think that Parliament should now go ahead and institute the recommendations of court, because in a justice system, why we have 3 arms of government is that when court suggests improvements, they are implemented by the other arms of government. Thank you, Isaac.
Timothy, your closing remarks on the program.
Thank you, Isaac. I think we have a very beautiful country as Uganda, and it should be the responsibility of all of us, as the Constitution demands of us, to ensure that we participate, demand, but also improve all the aspects that the Constitution envisages. And so this is a clarion call to all of us that we should take interest in participating, understanding, but also more importantly, appreciate what's going on. Everyone has a responsibility to ensure that this country is in a better place. The question of governance is improved, but more importantly is that we have a citizenry that is aware and that can demand for better. And so I think for me, to our viewers, is to encourage us to be part of this process. Parliament we should demand for better. The executive, the same. The judiciary, we should be able to, collectively work to rethink and see where is our country, where do we desire it to be, and more importantly, there are times when those that we've given responsibility have failed us, and it should be our responsibility to call them out, to demand for better, but also, continuously seek for better. Charity here has talked about the electoral process. We are getting into that season. That's yet an opportunity for us to partake of this process, to ensure that we participate and we are able to bring on board leaders that are able to represent our desires, but also champion our cause. As Charity, for example, suggests, is our desire would be a clean slate in the legislature. I'm not so sure what the executive looks like, but I would recommend the same. Whichever way we want to champion our country's vision, let's participate in that process, in the electoral process, in the governance, and in all the other spaces that we have. Thank you so much.
I must appreciate you, my guests, Charity and Timothy, for your able participation on the program, respecting today's topic. Once again, many thanks to our viewers for your participation and keeping us company from the start of this program up to its conclusion. Many thanks to the production unit for keeping us live on air. Our dear viewers, please engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Facebook, you can watch this program and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.